Um, the first story that I want to tell is about how I stopped smoking. And I used to think, this is how my Baba story begins, and I used to be very embarrassed about that. It seemed like such a stopping smoking and Baba. But the longer that I've known about Baba, the more I realize it's the perfect story, of course. I tried everything. I started smoking when I was 18. And in my late 50s, our youngest daughter, Kate, who was in her 20s, was in the hospital for a short time. And I went, of course, every day to visit her. And I'd go out to have my cigarette, and then I'd come back. And it occurred to me at some point, what's wrong with this picture? This is going to be totally flipped. Someday, not very long from now, I'm going to be in the bed. She's going to be coming to see me, and I'm not going to be able to go out for my cigarette. So what am I going to do? So I really tried a number of things, and nothing was working. I knew at that point there is a lovely little band of Baba lovers in Minnesota, and one of them was a good friend of mine from college, and she had told me about Marge Sukoff, who did energy healing, and I thought, well, I'll try that. Nothing else was working. So I went to see Marge. She said I would have to come to her 3 times. And she just began, she had me lay down on a bed, and she covered me with a blanket. And then she just put her hands on me and said, she addressed Baba, she didn't address me. She said, Baba, Monica is here. This is Monica, and she is going to be brave and try to quit smoking. And I thought to myself, brave? What? I mean, it just really didn't quite compute. And then she just went through this healing, and I did go for the 3 times. And at the final healing, there was a book on the coffee table, Nashawan's Beloved. And just as a matter of conversation, she said, the man who wrote this book is going to come this weekend and talk to us all. It's a really good book. Would you like to borrow it? And I thought to myself, this has worked so well, and she has really helped me. Sure, I'll borrow the book. I think it was almost a year before I gave it back to her, and it's because I didn't want to give it up. I really, it has on the cover the painting of Baba by Julian Lamar that is in Baba's house. So beautiful. And as I read that book and then began to read I read some Val Natu, the conversations, the more I read, the more everything that I knew, having been raised Catholic, and I'd been a good Catholic, and I really knew my stuff, the more I read, the more it was like a little kernel fell away, and it was like, well, that's what that's supposed to really mean. And it would happen over and over again. So I had brought these books home. I think it's your turn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Monica did bring the books home. And as she said, we were both raised Catholics, good Catholics, and very involved in the Catholic Church all the time. We were growing up. When we got married, we were married in a cathedral with a consolidated, no, not a consolidated mass. What is it called?
Concelebrated.
That one. That was with the bishop and everything, and our kids were raised Catholics, and all of a sudden, it just, nothing computed anymore within the church. It had nothing to do with God or spirituality. It had to do with politics and abuse. So we left the church, and I just decided, yeah, this is fine with me. I loved a sense of spirituality that I continued to enjoy, and I also realized that the existence of God is something you had to really come to intuitively, and I wasn't good at intuition, and therefore realized that my relationship with God was based on doubt, that I didn't know, and that most people really didn't know whether God existed or not, unless you really had a good intuitive sense about you, which I didn't have. But I was comfortable with that realization. And then Monica brought these books home, and I thought, oh my gosh. She and I have done everything together since we met when we were 18 years old. And I looked at Monica one day and I thought to myself, she's got this Indian guru now she's starting to talk about. And I said to her, you know, I think this is the first time in our life where our path will start to diverge. Not in terms of emotion or love, but just in terms of activity. She was going to start pursuing something I had absolutely no interest in. However, Marge Sukoff, who kept good contact with Monica and myself because her husband and she were both going through very serious health issues. And Monica was over there helping Marge quite a bit in taking care of herself. And Marge suggested getting together to read God Speaks. And she also suggested that with the two of us and her, that she would invite her daughter Clea and her husband David to come. And we did that, me somewhat reluctantly, but I started to really admire what was in that book. And as we completed it, it really brought me to Baba, but I thought it brought me intellectually. And I thought, yeah, that's me, I'm an intellectual, and it answers some of my questions. And I was pretty confident that that was good enough for me, because it answered. I was always interested in astrophysics and theoretical physics, not that I understood it, but I loved the subject matter. And in recent years, theoretical physics started coming up with something way before the Big Bang, and it was called eternal inflation and then cosmic inflation. And the more I read about it, I thought, oh my God, Baba already named that. Eternal inflation was an existence of probabilities, and it conformed perfectly with the beyond God that Baba explained. And then cosmic inflation fit perfectly with the who am I that Baba, that God, the beyond God asked of himself. And in terms of theoretical physics, it almost explains it in the same way. And then all of a sudden the Big Bang occurred. And the Big Bang was exactly, as Baba describes, the answer to who am I. And it was all the illusion that was created out of that. And I thought, my God, this man nailed this years before the physicists did. Oh, right, this guy's pretty cool. So that, you know, and I thought, well, intellectually, yeah. And I'll turn it back to Monica in a moment, but I want to say that things changed for me. I started to learn how to be intuitive because of that, and I learned very quickly that it wasn't an intellectual thing that brought me to Baba. Because intellectually you could still question things about what happened. How did the beyond God ever get there? You still don't explain the very beginning of anything, in a sense. But I realized that as the relationship grew for both of us, that what was becoming obvious to me is that I was more of a experiential type of person. That even in reading God Speaks, it wasn't so much the intellectual arguments that he presented. It was the experience of hearing his voice explain things. It was the personal experience of his voice to me that mattered. And I have more to say about that. But she's anxious to talk again. Yes?
Um, so we began to come to the center. We would stay for maybe a week to 10 days. And on our second visit, everybody was talking about somebody named Darwin Shaw, who was going to give his last discourse in the reading room on a Sunday afternoon. And everyone was so excited. In fact, some of the people who had come to stay on the center were here only because of that. So, of course, we wanted to go. We thought it's going to be really packed. So we left our cabin. We were staying in the far cabin, I think, a half hour early to get to the library. Walked into the library. It was so jammed. We ended up sitting, they had piled cushions on top of a table that was pushed against the wall. And we had to climb up on these cushions and sit literally with our backs against the wall, right across from the desk and the chair where actually Darwin would end up sitting. And Bob brought his camera, and we had asked Jeff ahead of time if it might be possible for Bob to take a photograph of Darwin. And Jeff said, I don't know, I'll ask him. And if you do it, it should be right when he comes in and sits down, and I'll give you a signal if it's okay. So the room was just buzzing, and we all had a half hour from the time we arrived to sit there and wait. And all of a sudden, there was just kind of a hush over to the left, and I turned around, and the crowd was just parting, and this little gentle man was walking through so quietly. The energy he brought into that room was just amazing to me. It was raining that day too, so it was kind of dark outside those windows that are behind the desk. So Darwin came up, and as he was sitting down, I saw Jeff bend over and say something to him. And Darwin sort of nodded, and he looked up, and he found us sitting across the room from him with our backs against the wall, and he put his hand up like this to wave. And when he did, the sun came out behind him, and his entire figure was just limned in light. It just hit my heart like Baba was saying hello to us through Darwin. Is how it felt to me, and it does to this day. And we have that photograph. I love that photograph. We have it framed in our house.
Yeah, what happened, and Jeff had kind of nodded that it was okay. And what happened, I had a manual on the camera, and so I set it with the dark background to it. And just when he raised his hand, and I had everything set up manually, and I was just getting ready to push the shutter, and this light came from behind him, that backlight. And of course, it just outlined him in light. It just was, and I clicked it. My first reaction is, oh, that just ruined that photograph. But I was so self-conscious because he did do that was our chance, and that was our, put the camera down now. But it turned out to be
Beautiful.
a real gift.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Talk about experiences on the center, and Monica was always every year more anxious to come to the center. Her experiences on the center were so incredible, and mine turned out each year to be quite the opposite. I've always been a very physical person growing up the way I did, someone who lived on the streets as a kid. My parents were immigrants who both worked until the day they died, and so the street was my home and my buddies were my family, and we learned to live that way. So, the way I learned was things had to be shoved at me or pushed, whether it was in school or the neighborhood. So when I went to the center, my first experience was I don't know, you know. Everybody talks in such beautiful terms, and I can't associate with anything anybody's talking about. And we'd go to, the barn was my favorite place, but we would go to Baba's house, and we would go to the barn every day. And I would see people put their head down at Baba's chair, and I thought, well, you know, I need to experience what people are experiencing. And I think the first time it happened, I was in the barn, and
Yeah, you
I put my head down, and it was this vortex. I almost lost consciousness. It was just this absolute strong vortex in my mind. It was like going down a dark hole. And it just startled me. I put my head up and everything was clear, and I put my head down again in the vortex again. The whole week we were there, every time I put my head down on either Baba's chair in the compound at Baba's house or the barn, that vortex would be there. It would be as strong, it would be so, it was like having vertigo. And I thought, there's something about this, there's something about the power of what's here that is doing it, but I didn't know how to interpret that. But I did know that it felt like a cleansing, like it was pulling something like maybe anger or doubt out of my mind, but I didn't know how to call it that. So that was, especially the first year, that was my strongest impression. The second year I came back, I thought, well, you know, let's see what happens if I put my head down again. And the vortex was there, but it was a lot weaker. And that whole week again, we were there, that vortex continued, but it was, by the end, it had gotten so weak that it virtually had disappeared. And I thought, wow, you know, there's a meaning here. It could just mean I'm letting go of anger or, you know, whatever it meant, but it was meaningful. The third year, 2004, we went, and we had a chance to stay in the farm shed. And while we were there, Monica and I were using different bathrooms. And I had more hair than I do now, so I actually had something to dry with a towel, and I had my hands up. And I actually had it on top of my hands on top of my head, and there's these big, heavy windows in the bathrooms, and they're held up with these heavy brass hooks.
Held open.
Held open. And I'm standing by the mirror drying what's left of my hair, and the window's above my head, and all of a sudden I feel this heavy pressure pushing down, and the towel's kind of over my face, and I don't know what's pushing, and I kind of let this heavy, heavy window is literally just laying on my hands. And it was up quite a bit when it came down, but it didn't. If it had come down, I'm sure I would have gotten a concussion.
Yeah.
But it was just laying on my hands. And so I kind of held it up and got out from under and swung it closed, and here the brass hook hanging down was totally straightened out. It was no longer a hook, it was just a brass rod. Now my work background was working with engineers and metallurgists in a number of areas, and so I knew metallurgy, I knew copper alloys, I knew iron alloys, I knew nickel alloys, and I looked at it thinking, well, it was fatigue, and there was just no fatigue. There was no crystallization of the metal. Someone had just straightened the hook and laid the window on my head.
While you were in the bathroom, because it was up when you walked in.
Yeah, and when it was open, and then it was just laying on my head. I took the hook out, and we let Jeff know, and I did get another hook put in there, and I took the hook home with me, and I photographed it. And as you might know, we are moving, and so a lot of things are being packed, and I have no idea where I packed that hook right now. I was going to pull it out to show you, and I don't know. The computer, or the photos in my computer, but so I can't prove it. But it's like by the third time coming around to Baba every year with doubts and anger, in spite of all my wonderful experience of Baba through God Speaks, there was something that being in the community of Baba lovers and watching how they love Baba just threw me into doubt all the time about my relationship. I just could not compete with it. And so those doubts were there, and I think that vortex started pulling those doubts away. And I wasn't quite there yet, so Baba had to be a little bit more forceful, I think. So the story goes on a little bit. You go ahead.
Okay. I think it was either that same year or maybe the next year. Our Baba group in Minnesota, Jal and Dolly were going to come to America, and we had heard that. And we decided to invite them to come to the Twin Cities. And we didn't have a center there, so we thought what we would do is take turns at each other's houses. We were retired at that point, but many people in the group were still working. So we decided that the meeting time should be dinner time, and we would take turns hosting a dinner in the evening. However, they were staying we had an Indian couple in the group, and they were such great hosts and hostesses. And they had a beautiful big house in the suburbs, and that's where they were staying. But that couple was gone during the day too. So Bob and I decided we would ask them if they would like us to pick them up and bring them into the city, and we could go to Como Park, we could do a few things, and then come back and have a lunch, and then we'd take them back there for a rest before the evening. Well, they thought that was a great idea. So Jal and Dolly were going to come to our house. And the backstory for me with this is, as soon as we had now known about Baba for 4 years, I think, everybody in the Baba community in Minnesota, and every time we would come to the center, when did you go to India? Have you been to India? And I didn't feel any pull at all to go to India. And I thought, well, I'm not going to go because everybody thinks I should go. I'll have to wait and see if I feel like I should go. The people in our group who had been to India had told me stories about Dolly and how she would open the samadhi every morning. And if you were lucky, you could help her. You could scrub the steps, you could do all these things to open the samadhi for the day. And at this was a really kind of hard period of time for me. Bob hadn't retired yet.
Nope.
So he was gone to work, and our 3 daughters were out in the world doing their thing. And I was in this house where we had raised this family by myself during the day, and it felt like a mausoleum, like, ugh. And I had a routine. I would get up, our windows faced east in our bedroom. I would go over, and I would just put my forehead on the window, and I would look down. We lived on Lexington Parkway in St. Paul, which is a very busy street. I would look down, I would see everybody, rush hour traffic going by. I could see people in cars. And I would then continue going east in my mind until I was at the samadhi. And I would sort of pretend that Dolly was letting me help her open the samadhi for the day. And then I would ask Baba to stay with me during the day and tell him things are kind of tough, you know. And I would have made the bed before I did this. And we had a picture of Baba over the bed. And so after I did that, I'd kind of turn around. You know how you kind of smooth the sheet or cover the last time. And I'd look at the picture of Baba, and I would leave and go downstairs, and my day would begin. So we arrive at our house with Jal and Dolly, and Bob says to Jal, I'll show you the downstairs. And I said to Dolly, okay, let's go upstairs. So Dolly and I go upstairs, and it was 3 bedrooms. Our daughters did have the other 2 bedrooms. They were now guest rooms. She looked at those 2 first, and then she came into our bedroom. She said, oh, this is your bedroom. And I said, And she went over and she stood at the window and looked out, and then she turned around and she saw the picture of Baba over the bed. And she patted the bed. And she said, "This is really a beautiful room." And she was ready to go down the stairs. And I realized she had done exactly what I did every morning, thinking about her at the Samadhi. And it was just like Baba coming into my life. So I took Dolly downstairs. I brought Jal up. Dolly stayed with Bob to see the downstairs. Jal did exactly the same thing in that bedroom. So it was just an experience.
They were really inexperienced.
Oh, they were so much
good.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was such an incredible 3 days. So,
Very sweet.
Beautiful. Yeah, I guess I would like to say one thing about, as Monica relates these stories, she continued to bring books home.
Oh, I did.
The Baba community had quite a large library that you could lend books out of, or you could buy books from their own kind of existing bookstore that they would open during Sahavas every year in Minnesota. But you also started learning how to order from Sherry. And I think more than anything, it was certainly the books that kept bringing me along, the personal lives of people like Margaret and Elizabeth and Kitty were so meaningful to me, their own personal experience. Because that's what I was looking for, a personal experience. I wasn't looking for explanations anymore. And I was so desperate for it. But my biggest experience was Monica's belief. Every day, and when things would come up that were difficult, she would talk about Baba in such a real way to me that it would kind of settle things down. Because I was, as she said, I was doing a lot of traveling at that time. A lot of heavy work going on, because I did retire, as Monica did from her work, retired at the end of the year that John and Dolly came.
Yeah.
So it was a big push to be able to get that done. But as Sahavasas went on in Minnesota, I still, as much as I thought Baba had brought me along, I was still struggling with issues. If it's just a matter of where I was in life at the time, whether it was because I was getting ready to retire, whether it was, a backstory about where I came from, I don't know what it was, but I would get together with people in Sahavas, and my experience by the end of Sahavas was anger. I would walk out of Sahavas angry. Inexplicable, but angry. So, just a couple short anecdotes about that. The first time I remember one happening is they would always end at noon, lunch, and then Monica and I would, sometimes it was a short drive, sometimes it was a long drive to get back into town. And the first thing one of us had to do was go to the grocery store and get something for dinner. And so I did that, and I went to our local grocery store, which was called Kowalski's. It was a large, regular supermarket. Yeah. And I walked in the door, and I was just standing there because I had to think which way to go. And all of a sudden, I got hit so hard from behind. I was maybe 10 feet from the side wall where you come in. I went flying, and I literally bounced off the wall. Now, back then, I was about 1.5 inches taller and 20 pounds heavier, so whoever hit me certainly knew that they had hit something. And I turned around, and there was this huge man standing there. Had to be 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", huge, muscular guy. He literally had run into me and thrown me against the wall. Didn't even look at me. He was looking around as I was, wondering where to go, and then he went shopping.
Never said a word.
I'm just like, talk about anger, now it's really building up. So I walk back to where I was. Now, I still don't know where I'm going to go in the store because there's many different directions. And I got hit so hard again that I actually did a 360 spin. It was a tile floor. I spun all the way around. And there was a man standing there looking, wondering which way to go. He was shorter, but built as wide as he was tall. He had hit me so hard that I had spun around. And I just looked at him and I had my fist like that. And it's like, he'll kill me the next time. You know, I thought, okay, you know. It's like, Papa, jeez, okay, just let me be angry, will you? Just get over it. Just let me alone. Well, this went on for 3 Sahabases.
It did.
The next time there was a Sahabas, it was fall time, came home on Sunday. We both went out to get something to eat, and we parked in a parking lot that belonged to Bower Drug. And we both remember this. We got out, and a pickup truck pulls in and just about runs us down. We jumped out of the way. And the guy went by. He turned around. We thought, oh, geez. So we started to walk, and here's something. We look, truck's coming at us again. And we jumped away a second time. And I was thinking, then the truck parks, and I am so furious. I'm going over to do whatever. This person gets out of the truck. I don't know if it was a man or a woman.
It was a man.
And he just got out and walked. And so he was. He did not
Really?
see us in the same way that these 2 other men never knew that I was there. I was non-existent entity. And again, it happened at the exact time of coming home for Sahabas, where I was all this pent-up energy about and frustration, and it just would knock the daylights out of me. It just. And the last story, and I think by this time, I think Baba pretty much had gotten my attention to give it up and quit fighting him. It was the last Sahabas that this happened. Came home. We went out to dinner this time. We went to W.A. Frost near downtown St. Paul. And beautiful patio. We ate inside, but they have a beautiful patio and people waiting to get in, and they're sitting on park benches along the walkway out to the parking lot. And Monica kind of walking along, and there's this young man, mid-20s, 30, and another gentleman sitting next to him, and the young man says something. And of course, I'm still full of all this rage again from Sahabas. And God only knows what I thought he said, but I just thought for sure he had said something to me that was really wrong. And I remember cocking my fist and walking up to him. He was sitting down, and I looked at him and I said, "What did you say to me?" And all of a sudden, Robin, this hand, I was just staring at the guy in his eyes, and his hand came down and just rested on my hand. And I looked over, and this gentleman sitting next to him was this really big, black, beautiful black man. His hand was resting on mine, and he just looked at me, and he said, "You don't want to do that, do you?" And everything in me, all this frustration and anger over all this time just absolutely melted away. It's like Baba finally had to come firsthand to do this. He kept sending other people, but he needed another way to touch me. And so, talk about needing experiences in my life, I guess, that's what he gave me. That kind of did it, so.
So our final story is how we happened to end up here, which we had no intention of doing. We would come to the center once a year, and we loved it. I loved it. Bob was always ready to go home before I was. Mm-hmm. But it got better as the years went along. Mm-hmm. And in 2010, Bob suggested that maybe we could go stay at Land's End, which is right next to the center, because the center at that point, I think, still had a limit on the time that you could stay on the center. And Bob said, we should go for a month. Really? And we should see if we can be of service during that time, and just stay at Land's End. I thought it was a great idea. And so it is what we did. And this was January, and our last day, we had, it was a marvelous month. And Barbara Plews had gotten us set up with, we did books in the library, and we
Worked at archives.
We worked at
Did
archives.
raking.
We did a lot of things, and we just loved it.
Mhm.
So our last day was Honor TV, and we had never been on the center for Honor TV yet. I was really looking forward to it. However, we had been in a condo for a month. This was a road trip. We had to pack up and be out of there by 11 o'clock. Yeah, and I thought, this is going to be tight, so
The next morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So I thought, I've got to really work on this ahead of time, but it was hard to do because everything was rolling along. So we went to our first Honor TV in the barn. It was beautiful. And when we were walking out, Bob went ahead to get the car. I had had surgery on my knee right before coming in. It was hard for me to walk too far, so he was going to bring the car. So he was gone, and just ahead of me on the walk, I saw Carolyn Ball. And we had been to the opening of the Heartland Center in Prague. And Carolyn was very involved in setting that all up, and she gave a talk at that. So I remembered her from that visit, but I thought I had seen her here after that, and I wondered if our visits coincided, or it occurred to me maybe she has moved here. And so I just tapped her on the shoulder. She was right ahead of me on the path, and I said, "Hi, Carolyn, I'm Monica Ochtrup, and I remember you from Prague. Do you live here now?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, I moved here, I don't know however many years ago." And she said, "I just love it. I'm so happy I did that." And I said, "Oh." And she said, "In fact, there's a house for sale right down the street from me." And by now Bob had come back, and the two of us were there. She said, "You guys should come and see it." "We should come." And I said, "Well, that would be really sweet, but we've got to get back. I've got to get things done. We have to be on the road tomorrow morning. We've got to go cross country." And she said, "No, I mean, this house is in foreclosure." And she really was kind of insistent. And so we finally, and she said, "We could meet at lunch, just come to lunch." And then she said, "I know the realtor over there, and I'll call him, and we could just go together right after lunch and look at the house." So, okay. So we did that, and we opened the door and walked. The place was empty. There was no furniture in it. It was painted Easter egg, pink, and green. So, the color, you had to really deal with that, but neither of us really saw that. We just saw this beautiful house, and it immediately occurred to us, this is right across from the center, like.
Yeah, I'd like to just, one thing Monica and I have always enjoyed in the Twin Cities where we lived, almost all of our married life before we moved here, was kind of gawking at homes where people live and because the neighborhoods are so, regardless of the type of neighborhood, the architecture and the feeling of warmth in those neighborhoods is so wonderful. And we'd always be driving home different ways in different streets, looking at houses. And so because we were here for a month, and in the mornings I'd wake up early and have a little breakfast, and I'd get on the computer and check email and whatever. And I was always curious about what houses were like here because we had never driven through town.
Yeah, we always just been.
And I thought, well, I'm just going to pull up realty stuff and see where houses are, so I get a sense of neighborhoods. As soon as I would do that, I'd lose the connection, I'd lose the link, and nothing would work. So I'd walk away and later I'd come back and the computer's working again. And so the next day and we spent a lot of time at the center. Barbara gave us so many opportunities to do stuff there. I thought, well, I'll check a link again. So as soon as we go a realtor or house for sale,
Nothing.
honest, no link. It happened every single time, and if I did it 5 or 6 or 8 days out of those 30 days, 31 days we were here, never, ever, ever it would always lose the connection. Never thought much of it, just thinking, wow, this is just weird stuff. But all of a sudden, we're at this house and something starts dawning on us a little bit.
Yeah, and there was a program at the meeting place that night, and we had sort of thought it over in the afternoon, and we didn't want to move here. We loved living in Minnesota, but the thought occurred to us, because we just loved that month of being of service on the center, that if we lived here, we could do that. And so the first thing we wanted to do was ask Barbara Plews if that'd be possible. So we went to the program that night, and she was sitting on a bench along the side, and I said, well, should we just go talk to her now? So we did, and she said, oh, absolutely, of course, there'd be lots of things for you to do. And we were both kind of in shock, I think, because this was all happening, and we hadn't meant for it to happen. And she took a look at me, and she put her hand on my shoulder, and she said, you just take good care of yourself. Because I think I must have looked pretty...
We were pretty strung out.
Yeah, I think we were. So we had a 4-day trip home in a car, and we talked about it that first day of driving. The first night was in Augusta, I think. The second night was in Nashville. And when I got up that morning, Bob would always go down and get the paper and get coffee, and I'd be slower to wake up. And I thought to myself, if we are really considering this, we've got to ask our daughters if it's okay with them if we move across country. So Bob came up, and we were ready to get on the road, and he said, yeah, that's a really good idea. So this was a weekday, and we're both, they're working, they have their lives. We're not going to get a hold of them, but I'm going to try. We got a hold of every one of them over the phone as we just presented this to them. They thought it was a great idea. And I got off the phone and I said to Bob, do you think they like us? And of course, by the time we got home and this was actually going to happen, it was all much harder. It was much harder on all of us, I think. But anyway, so Bob said, he handed me the phone and said, here, just keep going, call Chris Price, who was the realtor, tell him we're interested. Because he had said to us, this house isn't going to be here long. If you're interested, think about it.
Yeah, it hadn't gone on the market yet. It was just
So I said, okay. And I talked to Chris, and he said, great, where are you staying tonight? I gave him the hotel. He said, I'm going to fax papers. In the meantime, he said, I'm going to call the bank. I'm going to need some financial information, and so you'll probably be hearing from them. So I hung up the phone. I looked at Bob and I said, we're going to get papers at our hotel tonight. Phone rings. I picked it up, and it was a woman from the bank asking for financial information. And I didn't have that on the tip of my tongue. Bob did, though. He's driving. This is rush hour in Nashville. It's 4 lanes. Bob said, give me the phone. He tucks in behind this truck. I don't know where the truck was going. He didn't either. But you know how you can just kind of get in the stream? And he tucked in behind that truck. He gave the financial information.
I want to offer a caveat here to all of you out there who think they should drive and be on the cell phone at the same time. The answer is absolutely not. I do not do that anymore.
Yeah.
But
Well, you
it
didn't
was-
even do it much then.
No, but we did tuck behind the semi,
And it did work.
yeah,
And we did get those papers that night.
yeah.
And we got home and things just
Mm. It's
rolled.
amazing.
I had to have 2 surgeries that summer. I had to have, the knee surgery had been botched, and so I had to have a second surgery on my knee, and I had to have cataract surgery on both eyes. And they were set up for June, July, and August. And this was January.
February now.
February.
Yeah, mid-February.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyway, we got the in-house realtor in the cooperative where we lived and said we were gonna be putting our place
Mhm.
on the market. I got on the phone to find out if the knee surgery guy could fit me in this time frame. And he said, I'll work on it, don't go far from the phone. I said, okay.
Mhm.
I hung up the phone and I realized I had to get stuff down to the laundry. And so I loaded that up. I walked out the door and our neighbor, Nancy Peterson, said, I heard you guys are selling your place. I want to buy it. It was like, we
Yeah.
never even showed it.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, because there was work that we wanted to have done here, we planned a trip back here in April to get that going. And Monica needed that surgery, so that's why you were pushing your
Yeah.
surgeon to try and get it done early. And he said he'd check it out, and he did call you back and got
And he
you
did
in.
do it, yeah.
But that was what we had to tell Nancy Peterson too, is we couldn't move until August. And that was fine with her, but she would have to sell her place with someone with the same understanding that they couldn't buy it till August. And that's another part of the story.
That's really your part.
The person who bought Nancy Peterson's is a woman who, when she heard it was August, thought that was great, it would work really well for her. Well, a couple of years later, we were back in the cities visiting, and we were at Beckerwood to visit with some friends, and this woman coming out of the garage pulled over and called over to us, and we went over, and she looked at me and she said, your name is Bob? And I said, yeah. And she said, you don't remember me? And I said, no. She said, I bought Nancy Peterson's partner. I said, oh. And she said, well, the reason I did is some years before that there was an open house and I stopped by your place and you convinced me that I should move to Beckerwood. So it was the woman who bought Nancy so that Nancy could buy ours that I had convinced years before.
It's like
So,
how to set this thing
it's-
up
yeah,
so
it's like, whoa.
long ago.
But there's just a little bit more to say about, we came back in April and our realty person put a contractor in touch with us. And we went through all the things that we felt the house needed. And the price was just took our breath away. It was so expensive. And it's just like, oh no, where do we go?
We couldn't afford, we really couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
And it was heartbreaking. Our oldest daughter, Jan, had come to look at the house with us, and so here we were, really down, and she said, listen, we all have to fly back tomorrow. I really want to go to show you the books. It was still in North Myrtle at that point. So we said, yeah, let's go. So all 3 of us get into the car. Jen and I go into the bookstore. Bob said, I'm just going to wait in the car.
Well, I got back on the cell phone to talk to the contractor to see what this was all about, because we had some understandings about price structure, and he quite honestly didn't live up to any of that, and I just
Wasn't
needed
it,
to
but-
try, because we were going the next morning, we had to fly out,
Yeah.
and this was our only opportunity to make some decisions. So I finally just hung up and came in the bookstore.
Yeah. Well, we got into the bookstore, and I was telling Laura how we were buying this house, and we needed work done in it, and we'd had a contractor, and it just wasn't going to work. And somebody from another part of the store said, who's moving here? And I turned around, and it was Sheila Krinsky, who I didn't know before that, but I certainly got to know her quickly. And Sheila said, well, you need Price Branch. And I said, well, who's Price Branch? And she said, well, he's a general contractor and he can do that work for you. Here's his phone number. So we went out to the car, we called Price, and we told him we had to be on a plane in the morning. He said, that's fine, I'll come over. Right now, I'll look everything over. I'll have a price for you by tomorrow morning before you go. And
So he met us here late that afternoon. We went through the outside, inside of the house, all the things that we thought we needed done. He said, okay. He said, I'll call you.
no, he said, where are you staying?
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah.
And we were staying at the Fairfield Inn next
Yeah.
door, and he said, I'll see you there tomorrow morning. And he was there promptly at 9 o'clock. I was packing the suitcase. He gave Bob the price. Was absolutely doable. Everything we needed done.
Yeah, and the price was right where our budget was.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So here we are.
here we are.
And there you go.
Yeah. So it's been a heck of a journey. And not always easy, and leaving is not easy at all.
It's going to be really hard
It's
to leave
really
this
been
community.
difficult, yeah.
It's been great to be a part of this community.
Yeah.
But it is time to go.
Yeah, we're retired from all, we were so blessed. We were given so many opportunities to be of service on the
Yeah,
center.
and what happened last year is I had a compression fracture in my back and a macular hole in my eye, and Bob was my caretaker, and we had to drop all of those service jobs except one. We continued to do the reading, host the reading on Saturday afternoons, but it was clear to us, even though I'm better now, that we're 76 and more of this is going to happen rather than less. And
Yeah.
it just...
But we did, you know, and you're the one who is most clear about the fact that we came here to be of service. If Barbara had not made that clear that we could do that, I don't think there would have been any thought at all of moving here. That was, it wasn't just being by the center or being part of the community, because we have an incredible, lovely community back in Minnesota.
Minnesota, and it was hard to leave them.
Yeah, yeah. So, and now that that service is done, it is done.
It's just time to go home.
Yeah. So, that's our story.
Say bye.
J. Bob.